the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. To hear about future episodes and access follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and more, sign up for exclusive access using the link in the podcast description. Well, Olivia, let's continue a little conversation here about, in Scotland where I am sitting physically, we have a little word called cúri, to cúri in. In Wales, they've got a little word called quitch, and in Denmark, they refer to hig. Each of those words are referring to the emotional environment that we share every day with our children. So I'd love to ask you, Olivia, how do we create safe, secure, and cosy places for play?
And that emotional environment is so key, and it's something that I think practitioners get confused about. It's how to create that emotional environment. And I would always say to my practitioners, how does a room make you feel when you walk in? Your brain takes in so much information, and us as adults know when you walk into a room, you process the room, the environment, and the people in it. Are they warm? Are they welcoming? Is it calm? Is it an aesthetically nice place to be? And I think that's the whole feeling, isn't it? It's that nurturing, homely, nice environment that makes you feel warm at the end of the day. We want children to feel warm, fuzzy, calm, and welcomed.
And I think that when we think about the 6 core strengths that we're trying to encourage our children to develop in the spaces that we share, if, even taking each one of them, I feel that attachment, which is the first one, we have thought about extensively and hugely, and it would be lovely to hear ways that you think you have encouraged attachment-led practice in your service.
Yes, of course. I remember many years ago when the key worker approach, was receiving a lot of attention. And again, going back to reflection, we used to assign in one of my settings a key worker before the child arrived. And actually on reflection and in team meetings, we realised that the children didn't even always bond with that key worker. And us as adults know that you don't always gel well with everybody that you meet, do you? So we then reflected and changed that approach, and we would allow the child to come in and see who they gravitated towards, saw how those interactions were taking place with each individual child, and therefore we let the child lead who wanted to be their key worker, then who had the best bond, and therefore developing that attachment, but letting the child lead that.
And attunement, so attuning to their peers, because realistically, should we as little humans be in a room with 10 children the same age as us, 15, 20, 30 children the same age as us? So attuning children to one another, how do we encourage, or how have you encouraged your staff teams, or have you seen practitioners being encouraged to allow children to get to know each other? Because emotionally, I need to be able to share and take turns and spend time with these little folk.
Yes, of course. And I think, like you say, the children being in the same room with the same age group, yes, that is a part of our practice. But I always loved it when the children would interact with different age groups. And it's incredible when you see a 4-year-old interacting and taking care of the 2-year-old and guiding them around the physical environment. And, one of my favourite moments when I was working in a setting was actually watching the older children really take that role play to the next level and look after the younger children, and they would read to them and they would teach them. So therefore the older children would almost act as those practitioners, and they absolutely adored taking care of the younger children. And I think sometimes mixing those age groups, whether that's outside or whether they just have certain times within the day to interact with not just peers of their same age, but other peers across the nursery.
And of course, as they do that, as they attune to one another, they're going to listen to each other, they're going to hear each other's vocabulary, and the older children will have a more expansive, one would hope, vocabulary than the little ones. So they'll be surrounded by not just adult vocabulary and conversation, but children's vocabulary and conversation. And I think we undervalue that sometimes, that, attachment is absolutely vital. And when I talk about attachment, I talk about attachment to the adults, but also to the peers, to the resources and to the spaces. And it's the same with attunement. When I attune myself, because I am here, I've just left the most important person in my life, and I'm now having to play for 6 hours sometimes with these other little people. So, that's huge. And the third core strength that we want children to develop emotionally is affiliation. How do I see myself here? How emotionally do I see myself in the stories that you're reading me? Do I see myself in the equipment that is in the home corner? Do I see myself, I think we paid a nod to that with putting a welcome poster up in 18 different languages, but at 3 I can't read that, so that's not for me, that's for my parent. So where do you see affiliation? And that's third core strength for our children, working in the service.
And I think that's really practitioners knowing their key children, isn't it? It's about understanding that child's environment at home, working with the parents, like we went back to, the environment, the parents and the setting. It's all linked, and it's so important that all of those are reflected on and work together. And understanding the child's home environment, then you can create certain parts in the setting where they can reflect and they can see themselves within that environment, and making sure that your resources are reflected on continuously to make sure that children can engage with their first-hand experiences within the setting, and therefore creating those language opportunities.
Yeah, and so in the home corner we would have had a walk in the past, and but I think we need to get bigger than that now. And I know that you and I have spoken about this before, but having a samovar, a Russian teapot, or having a vessel and a mug and a chalice and a goblet, and in the home corner, or a chandelier and a candelabra. All of that allows children to see a bit of their life, doesn't it? Or a lovely floral wallpaper on a wall. And then the next two of the core strengths are respect and tolerance. And I guess through the play, and playing in the loose parts, or playing in the mud kitchen, or playing in the block area or the construction area, depending on what you call it, staff need to reflect on what works for different types of children. Linguistically, am I ready for this language that you're hoping I gain from this? Emotionally, I'm going to feel more confident and respected and tolerated if that is the case. Where are your thoughts on that?
Well, every child is unique. What they enjoy is unique. Where they get excitement is unique. And I think reflecting in those team meetings and collaboration with your team is so important, because every cohort of children is very different. Year on year, we would have children engage in certain areas and then other children who wouldn't engage in those areas at all. So I think it really goes back to that key worker approach, and, what Ofsted are really looking for when they're reviewing your environment is, do those key workers understand their children? Do they know them? And therefore, if you know them, you can put those things in place that really give those first-hand experiences and allow the children to have that emotional well-being and feel at home in the environment that they are in.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of, the way you talked about that there, you were really reflecting on dispositions for play and how children come to the play. And, we all know children that will love to use 2 or 3 of those physical spaces and emotionally connect to those physical spaces, but there are other areas and spaces that they will ignore and not want to go. It's all that's yucky, that's sticky. I don't like getting my fingers dirty. I'm not allowed to at home. So, oh my goodness me, if finger painting or something like that's out. And so, what recognition should we give to the dispositions so that children are tolerant of, oh, well, I'm not going to use that to paint today, but I'm going to choose something else, and there's something else here for me to choose. Because language, as we know, Olivia, does not start in our mouths. No. Or our ears. It actually starts in our brain. And so, they need to be exposed to all of that thinking. And so what about the dispositions there? Do you think we think about that often enough? I've just written some 32 dispositions, I was writing it at the weekend, and I don't know, I think I maybe think about 12 of them, but not all of them.
No, and I think you're correct. I think there's so much to think about in early years. We don't think about those dispositions enough. And like you said, some children interact with certain areas, but not others. So then I would look at that with my practitioners and say, okay, how can we move the area that they're not engaged with into the area that we are? And how?
Yeah, and I think, because I know a little friend just now who's 4, and he's exuberant his disposition for maybe 4 of the areas in the space is exuberant and excited, and 2 of them he's actually quite hesitant and timid in. And so we've had a conversation as a team to emotionally, how do we get him to feel more confident in those areas that he's hesitant and timid in? Because we know that's not really his, learning disposition. And so, again, staff need to open their mindset up, I think, to that possibility.
And I think it links back to the physical environment, doesn't it? Like you said about the slide, the example of the slide. Are you reviewing the physical environment? And then are you reviewing the emotional environment? Is there something physically in the environment that is preventing that emotional link? And by reviewing the physical and emotional together, you could really look at it from the child's perspective.
Yeah, and the last key core strength for our children is self-regulation out of the 6. And, I think we talk so often, and we've got hundreds of books that are about one emotion, but there's so many books that we need to be sharing, and so many resources we need to be sharing that are not obviously about emotions, but they evoke an emotional response. And so if our children are, going to be encouraged to self-regulate themselves, and we're going to develop that, we need to look at the play we offer.
Yes, and it goes back to that self-regulation. It's going back to that reflection of the environment. Are there calm spaces? Are there spaces for children to self-regulate? Whether that is in your reading area and that's an adult supporting that self-regulation, or is there space for the child to just go to a quiet area and support themselves in that self-regulation? I think self-regulation is a key point of a child's whole emotional well-being. And as practitioners, we really need to review, are there spaces for that self-regulation, and are we reviewing children's interactions and being proactive when you can see a child and you feel they need to self-regulate? Are we stepping in then and supporting that child?
Yeah. And Montessori had a lovely idea there, I guess, to help children self-regulate, where she talks about the work mat. She would have I call it a gathering mat or a sitting mat. And in Montessori schools, and in lots of other nurseries now, because we've adapted her practice, you would have a little piece of material that a child can choose to play on. And that's saying to everybody, I need space here. I don't want to be, nobody's joining me. And then if they want another person to join them, okay, I've come down now, I'm a bit calmer, I want to engage again and cooperate and collaborate again, they would maybe take a slightly bigger mat and have space for 1 or 2 friends to join them. And then if they want to be big and bold and I'm so excited about my play, I'm ready to rejoin, they would take a big mat out and put it out, and anybody could join them then. And I think that's sometimes we look for the answers in our heads, and often it is in our physical spaces. That let's have a little cosy nook, or let's have a calming book corner area, but also to be able to take a mat and define me to choose to make that decision myself. Now that I'm ready to re-engage, is just fab. What a lovely little, offer to have with the children.
And I think that's a shared ethos across the cohort, isn't it? If that's your practice, it's amazing how quickly children pick that up. And we used to have an area that the child would choose, and the other children would say, "Oh, Benji just needs a bit of time out. I'll go and see if he wants to play in a minute." And it's amazing how children can pick up from other children that actually, I just need some quiet time now, and I'll come to you, or I'll invite you in when I'm ready.
Yeah, and I also remember in one of the other services I went into, they had a huge, big, old-fashioned basket chair, but one of the princess nets around it, and that was their thinking chair, it was called. And so if a child was getting upset, or they were frustrated, or they were getting a bit angry, one of the staff might suggest the thinking chair's empty, and you would see them running over to the thinking chair and wrapping themselves in this big net and just sitting there watching what was going on, and it calmed them down. And it's so much more positive than some of the other ways that we've encouraged children to do that. And so all of those core strengths that we've been talking about, Olivia, help language develop. How? Because it's about, and you said a little while ago, it's about time, giving children time to process. Do you think that there's work to be done on giving children time to process?
Oh, I do. And I think when practitioners understand that language development and understand that children need time to process, and when they're ready, you can echo back and forth those conversations and that thinking chair. What a lovely idea. And, I'm sure all of the children, that will just become a part of practice. And it's amazing sometimes when you implement one small change or name it something specific, the children, that becomes part of their practice. And they know that if they need some time out, there's your space, and when you're ready, you can come back.
Yeah, and also the way that we are as adults. If we ponder with the children, or we echo their comments, or we extend their comments, and so on, and not overwhelm them with questions, then that's going to allow them time and space to be tolerant and develop respect and self-regulate. Often it's like an interrogation sometimes when children, if a child brings you a book, they don't then follow it up by saying, can you ask me lots of questions now? They just want to immerse themselves in the book with you. And sometimes we just go into this, we've been trained to ask questions, so we'll ask lots of questions. So again, I guess, Olivia, to finish this little conversation off here about the emotional environment, what one thing do we need to know, do you think, more than anything else as a practitioner to get it right?
I think, again, it goes back to knowing your cohort of children and knowing how they engage and what they need emotionally out of that environment in order to self-regulate. And the questions that you just highlighted, that's key. I mean, open-ended questions, they're very important for all of us as practitioners to extend that vocabulary and language. However, children get overwhelmed and they don't want to be interrogated. So it's asking those key questions, but at the point that is right for the child. And when they want to give that information, most children, they come out with so much information, quite often you don't even need to ask the question.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that Mother Teresa once said that there is more hunger in the world for love and affirmation than there is for food. So perhaps we should stand, as you suggested at the beginning of our conversation, stand in the play spaces and measure how loved do our children feel. Do they feel loved? Do they really?
Is it warm? How does it make you feel? All of those questions. So important.
Fab, once again, we have scratched the surfaces, 6 core strengths. We've talked about our role in all of that. Oh my goodness me, there's so much to think about in emotional environments, isn't there? Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
I'd like to say, first of all, a huge, massive thank you to Olivia, our guest, for joining us and providing us such valuable insights into your past and your current roles, Olivia, which are very different. So that's fab.
Yes, very different.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alice Sharp, and Olivia Kirkby from TTS. If you have been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget to sign up, guys, via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings or Pinterest boards, to shop for resources relevant to the topics that we've discussed throughout our conversations. This podcast episode, oh my goodness, has been fabulous. So get your ears ready for the next one.